Deep in an enchanted forest, enclosed in branch and vine, stood the crooked cottage of a crooked sorcerer, obsessed with the magic of time. He lived alone with his magical birds to an old and jealous age, eagles, robins and owls all locked up in his magical cage. Fiach, or raven as they say, the most powerful bird of the lands. Mad with envy, sorcerer waited long for Raven's magic in his hands. He offered the raven freedom in exchange for his blessed gifts. He imbued them into a totem, and Raven was cast adrift. Sorcerer became obsessed with the gift of the two sides. He transported his soul to the future world where he wandered for days and nights. He scoured and searched the future days in search of the day of his death, with hopes to cheat the inevitable of taking one's final breath. He spent every moment in the future ignoring the present day, so when his present self grew weak, it died and began to decay. With no physical body to return, his soul wanders on and on. As to what of the cottage no villager knows. The sorcerer, the totem, the raven were simply gone. The next chapter of our story takes place one early and brumous morning in the seaside town of St Andrews, the day of town feast. One day a year the townsfolk congregate in the high street, offerings in hand to dine at the grand table. Bakers bring their largest loaves, chocolatiers offer their sweetest delicacies saved for this occasion, and florists decorate the streets with the most colourful, beautiful blooms. Down at the harbour, bitter winds nagged at the waterfront, and a fraught, bone-thin fisherman sat at the end of the dock, with knotted arms and dangling legs, cursing his uneventful morning fish. Fisherman simply wanted to impress his fellow townspeople with a ginormous fish, just like the good old days. He was once a fine fisherman, notorious for plentiful catches far beyond the east coast borders, as was his father before him, and his father before him. Over the years, for some unknown reason, his fortune changed and catches became few and far between. "What an unlucky man I am! I am not worthy," he muttered as the warbler bird mockingly mimicked his weeping. Fisherman scratched at his itchy, woolly clothes. They were ragged and ripped. On one foot he wore a fishing boot full of holes, and on the other a clunky bucket. Fisherman had clumsily trapped his foot in it a fair while back, but despite his tugs and pulls, it hadn't budged an inch. Fisherman was a nervous and clumsy chap, prone to trips and falls. He suffered from what the locals called a case of butterfingers. Compasses, nets and fishing rods would spring from his grasp. Plates, tankards and cutlery would slip through his fingers. To the townsfolk's amusement, Fisherman was often spotted dusting himself off from a particularly dramatic tumble or crashing down a steep flight of stairs. After all, walking round town with a clanking bucket on your foot mustn't have been easy. Under grey clouds, Fisherman fell to ponder his unlucky life. Overwhelmed with feelings of irrelevance and inadequacy, he cursed his unlucky life again. Fisherman heard a faint crow of a bird. He squinted his eyes toward the horizon to see a black raven gliding graciously towards him with what looked to be a pendant around its neck. Raven landed on the dock, poised and proud, and looked up at the fisherman with his sorrowful eyes. "Gentle fisherman, I can hear your cries on the winds. What troubles you?" he said. "All-knowing raven, it is but 3 days before the town feast, and I have nothing to bring to the table. I will be thought as rude and insignificant," Fisherman replied. "Look further. I will grant you a prophecy from this totem to find yourself a mighty catch to impress your fellow townsfolk. on one condition. The fisherman swallowed hard and asked, "What is it?" "Think of one thing that makes you happy." Camanich. It's Gaelic for early morning twilight. I'm happy for Camanich. The raven crowed and rendered up the magic of the totem. Take your fishing boat to the eastern coves before tomorrow's first light. You shall find yourself an impressively sized salmon. I warn you, tread carefully. 'Tis the home of the Gustbringer, a mythical creature invisible to the eye and tricky in nature. He can cause quite the windy bluster to ward off unwanted visitors when disturbed. Fisherman watched in awe as Raven stretched out his wings and tore into the morning sky. Fisherman jumped to his feet with excitement. He turned to make his way up to the seaside shack, not before tripping on his fishing line and plummeting nose first into the chilly waters. The next morning, Fisherman wrapped himself in thick woolly clothes and set out onto the placid waters in his fishing boat towards the eastern coves. To Fisherman's surprise, a great salmon fish leapt out of the water over his head and circled the small fishing boat. The fisherman could barely contain his excitement. He reeled out his lure and bait and waited. Within a few short moments, he felt a tug and a struggle. Elated and giddy, he drew in his fishing line. Fisherman reached to haul aboard the fish when a painful groan riddled the wind and echoed throughout the coves. The Gustbringer had woken and wasn't best pleased to find Fisherman in his domain. "Who dares disturb my sleepy coves will suffer a fate of mighty blows. Winds console me and smite his catch. Now never return to my precious patch." The skies blackened. The rain lashed and pelted. It hardened in the air and turned to sleet, then to hail, then to blistering cold. The bucket that Fisherman's foot was wedged in began to fill to the brim with ice water, causing his leg to shiver. A gust of wind churned up a ferocious wave that crashed into the side of Fisherman's boat, knocking him clean into the water, and the salmon scarpered away. Fisherman rowed his wet and disappointed self back to the harbour as dawn started drawing in. He sat once again at the end of the dock and lamented in his misfortune. "What an unlucky and unworthy man I am." The fisherman heard the harsh crow from above. Raven circled above and then landed graciously at the edge of the dock with the dangling totem in tow. "All-knowing Raven, I did as you instructed. I rowed out to the coves, but my cursed luck saw that I have nothing to show. Might you grant me another prophecy?" Raven pitied Fisherman and agreed on the condition that Fisherman revealed something that made him happy once more. "Splung," said the fisherman. It's the seafarer's Gaelic for the sparkle of light on the water. Raven bowed his head. The magic of the totem conjured another prophecy. "At the mouth of the River Eden, you will find a swarm of floundering rainbow fish. Be cautious. The mouth is a playground for mischievous selkies. The watery creatures shed their seal-like skin and lure townsfolk out to sea. Be sure not to agitate them, and luck will befall you." The next morning, to Raven's instruction, Fisherman woke rested and rosy and rowed out to the mouth of River Eden. The rustle of overhanging trees sounded like slithering snakes, and the eerie winds hooted like howling wolves. Fisherman hid himself in misty shadows and observed a havering group of selkies splashing and frolicking among the rocks. The merriment of the selkies entranced Fisherman and dealt painful blows of loneliness to the fisherman's heart. He couldn't remember the last time he had as much fun as they were having. "What an unlucky and unhappy man am I. Why should I deserve to catch such beautiful fish?" he said. Not long after, Fisherman noticed a shoal of tightly crowded rainbow fish heading upstream, just as Raven foretold. Fisherman hurriedly cast out his net and waited for luck to strike. His net bulked heavy, and he began to heave his lucky catch aboard.
"These are ours, intruder."
Fisherman turned unknowingly to find 3 foul-faced selkies closing in on his little boat. "I mean no harm to you," He quivered nervously, tangling himself in his net. "I'm a desperate and unlucky fisherman. All I want is a fish to present to the town feast." The Selkies cackled childishly at Fisherman, flashing their monstrous teeth.
Desperate and unlucky. You could do a lot worse than being desperate and unlucky.
The Selkies, unsatisfied with disrupting Fisherman's catch, began to whip their tails at the boat. They clawed and punched holes through the boat, causing it to fill with water and capsize, ensuring Fisherman could never use the boat again. The next morning, before the first ray of sun, Fisherman was met by Raven at the end of the docks. He told Raven all about the Selkies and his boat. As a sign of goodwill, Raven summoned the magic of Totem for one final prophecy, on one condition. "Tell me one more thing that makes you happy," said Raven. "I can't think of one," moped Fisherman. "Look further. I have granted you 2 prophecies. You claim your bad luck has stopped you, but your bad luck is of your own doing." Fisherman was baffled at Raven's words. "My own doing?" he questioned. "Precisely," exclaimed Raven. "The universe listens to us all. Tell it your wish, and it will conspire to ensure it comes true. You tell the universe that you're both unlucky and unworthy, so the universe listens and sends misfortune your way. Tell yourself you are worthy and lucky, and they both shall come," said Raven. "I'm worthy and lucky," said Fisherman. The words of self-assurance felt clunky and unfamiliar to him. "I don't feel any different." "Give the universe time, and it will work in your favour. Go to the town feast and tell them your tale," said Raven. "I cannot go empty-handed," moped Fisherman. "They don't want your offerings, they want your company, Fisherman." Raven crowed and soared upwards into the sky and headed towards the high street, bidding Fisherman to follow closely. Raven led him from the docks into the street of St. Andrews, where he was greeted by a thunderous roar of busy welcomes and a brimful glass of sweet red wine. The sky burned ruby as frenzied townfolk scurried about, adding the finishing touches to the long oak dining table in preparation for the feast. It stretched long and narrow down the high street from Blackfriars Chapel to the cathedral, laden with silver and gold, festive wreaths and flowers boasting the finest of wines and the most sumptuous of foods. Minstrels launched into a joyful jig that set the townsfolk into a delightful dance. After a few numbers, they sat at the table to catch their breath. As per custom, one by one, family by family, they stood to formally present their offering to the table. The turn quickly arrived at Fisherman. He stood up, nervous and unsteady. He felt ashamed and embarrassed. He looked upward to see Raven perched on a street lamp, awaiting his word. He remembered what Raven had told him. "I am worthy. I am lucky," he whispered to himself. Fisherman cleared his throat and addressed the locals. "Don't think me rude, but I haven't a fish to offer you." Fisherman began the torrid tale of his quest to catch his offering. He told them all about Raven and his totem, the gust bringer conjuring up a hailstorm and blowing him into the sea, and those pesky Selkies that spoiled his chances and his destroyed boat. "And that, unfortunately, is why I am empty-handed." The townsfolk sat frozen, bemused by the adventurous story. They erupted in a chorus of hearty applause. They shouted praise to Fisherman's unbelievable tale as an offering. "Great story, Fisherman! Bring more like that next year!" The evening grew on, and Fisherman relished in the tasty foods and good company. He laughed himself weary at the jokes and stories of his fellow townspeople. He sang the old classics and danced until the sun began to peep through the sunken hills. Fisherman gave his thanks and farewells to the party guests and headed towards the docks to look at the perfect winter's morning. He sat himself at the edge of the dock. The view was calming and pure as it once was, and Fisherman felt warm and safe, like he was home again. Fisherman looked down and gasped. He noticed 2 dangling feet. The bucket was gone. It must have dislodged during the fun of the town feast. "Thank you, Raven," he whispered with a smile onto the wind. Fisherman was unsure whether to trust that these mere affirmations were enough to change his story and his luck. He did know one thing, however. He knew that from his walk from Blackfriars Chapel all the way to the docks, he had not tripped nor stumbled once.